Hello, my friends. D.L. Anderson here. Welcome back to Transformation by Truth podcast as we share the truth concerning these last days and what you must do to save yourself from the violent times that are just ahead. Today's podcast is a word of truth accounting of the end times. The end is coming. The end is near. Today's podcast is entitled End Times 491, Reigning Over Prejudice, Part 1, The Great Danger of Partiality, the first of the 7 deadliest drivers of lawlessness. The podcast objectives are analyze the great danger of partiality, analyze the unlikely scenario in which partiality defeats honesty, and analyze the unlikely scenario in which partiality defeats righteousness. The first of the 7 deadliest drivers of lawlessness. Shalom, my beloved brothers and sisters, and welcome to day 353 of our exposition of lawlessness. In the most recent podcast, we analyze the role that the fear of Elohim plays in hearing from Elohim and receiving the knowledge of his will. We also laid a foundation for understanding one of the more critical keys to reigning over the spirit of prejudice. That is, quite simply, knowledge. For knowledge is the foundation of truth. And when men embrace truth, there can be no prejudice. No doubt, the majority within this nation have a desire for truth in concept. But alas, the desire for truth is never translated to a love for the truth in practice. Here is why. These individuals have not defeated the ruach of self. Ergo, they will show partiality to the truth that is aligned with the desires of their selfish hearts. Here lies the problem, many problems, and yet, for the sake of time, I will only address one. To wit, when you show partiality, you are, in effect, taking a bribe. Now, it's one thing when you are partial towards another, and yet it is much worse when you are partial towards yourself. Trust me, it's one of the worst things you could ever do. For when you are partial towards yourself, the one bribing you is you. Not only this, but when you are partial towards yourself, you are blinding your own eyes. And this is why so many within this nation are ignorant, delusional, and much maligned. It is because the one who shows partiality for any cause makes himself blind. And this is the greatest danger in taking a bribe. Exodus 23:8 is revealing, and do not take a bribe, for a bribe blinds the eyes for seeing and twists the words of the righteous. Deuteronomy 10:17, for Yahuwah, your Elohim, is Elohim of mighty ones and master of masters, the great El, mighty and awesome, who shows no partiality nor takes a bribe. Deuteronomy 16:19 through 20, do not distort right ruling, do not show partiality, nor take a bribe, for a bribe blinds the eyes of the wise and twists the words of the righteous. James 2:1 through 10, my brothers, do not hold the belief of our master Yahushua Messiah, the master of esteem, with partiality. But if you show partiality, you commit sin, being found guilty by the Torah as transgressors. For whoever shall guard all the Torah and yet stumble in one point, he is guilty of all. Now, within these scriptures lies the key to reigning over the spirit of prejudice. Vis-a-vis, you must guard your heart from partiality. Here is why. Partiality is designed to prevent you from receiving the Father's will, for it is situated at the interval between knowledge and the fear of Elohim. Not only this, but seeing as partiality also prevents you from overcoming your sinful nature. It is the first of the seven deadliest drivers of lawlessness. Brothers and sisters, hear me carefully as I say, this is huge. Trust me, we have analyzed several drivers of lawlessness until now. For example, fear, refusal, neglect, false justification, rationalization, stress, and stubbornness. And none of these are more damaging than partiality. My dear friends, think about that for a moment. Vis-a-vis, think about stubbornness and all we have learned about this deadly driver of lawlessness. And still, stubbornness is not nearly as deadly as partiality. Wow. Now, to understand this matter, we must analyze the evolution of partiality. Let's start by considering the following inflection point, to wit, an analysis of the aftermath of your victory over contempt. By unlocking the power of virtue, you defeated the spirit of contempt, and you initiated the critical process of purification. Therefore, seeing how you defeated his invading army, the spirit of prejudice must find a way to defeat the power of virtue by impeding the process of purification with the intent of stopping it altogether. Now, this scenario speaks to the primary difference between drivers and degrees of lawlessness. To wit, the degrees of lawlessness in this scenario will be less than useful. Here is why. All the degrees of lawlessness are incomplete apart from their corresponding degrees, which is why I liken each pair as an enemy nation and an invading army. Along these lines, an invading army is not nearly as formidable without an enemy nation. Likewise, an enemy nation is not nearly as formidable without an invading army. Now, that being said, immorality, irreverence, and blasphemy are not viable options in defeating the work of purification in your heart. Ergo, the spirit of prejudice needs something bigger. He needs something better, a secret weapon, as it were. Not only this, but he needs a force that is strong enough to defeat the power of righteousness and subtle enough to thwart the power of honesty. For there can be no purity where there is no righteousness nor honesty. Now, as fate would have it, that force does exist. My dear friends, the spirit of prejudice has a secret weapon that can defeat the work of virtue in your heart, even if you have defeated his invading army of contempt. Enter partiality, the first of the seven deadliest drivers of lawlessness. How partiality defeats honesty. Now, as I said before, this may seem unlikely per everything we have learned thus far in this series, seeing as all the degrees of holiness are superior to their corresponding degrees of lawlessness. And this is a true matter. Notwithstanding, it is also true that the superior nature of holiness does not guarantee that you will succeed every battle you fight with lawlessness. Likewise, the enemy will not concede any battle just because you are superior going into the battle. Brothers and sisters, hear me carefully as I say, many of our people have gone into spiritual battles as the heavy favorite, and yet they came out of these same battles as the biggest losers. Now, the question we should chiefly entertain is simply this. In the scenario of partiality, how does one become the biggest loser in spiritual warfare? The answer is sure, and it is founded upon the unlikely path partiality must follow to win two key battles. To wit, partiality must defeat the spirit of honesty and the spirit of righteousness in turn. Now, before we begin analyzing this unlikely scenario, I want to reiterate how this can only happen if you are not operating on all spiritual cylinders. To wit, if you follow the Ruach and you are engaged in your spiritual trade, this scenario will never happen. Ergo, the scenario we are analyzing is what happens when you are not being led by the set apart spirit for any stretch of your quest, and you are not committed to your spiritual practices. Always remember this and be advised. Now, let's start by analyzing how partiality defeats the work of honesty, beginning with the fact that partiality must first initiate some struggle with complacency. That's the key, my friends. Vis-a-vis, you must guard yourself against complacency for two primary reasons. One, complacency opens you up to every other degree of lawlessness. And two, the primary evolution of complacency is dishonesty. Ergo, if you are not reigning over complacency with a steady spiritual hand, you are opening the door to the spirit of dishonesty. And trust me, she will once again wreak havoc in your heart, for she feeds off partiality in a most deadly way. For that reason, it is imperative that we provide a definition for partiality, and from there, everything will become more clear. By definition, partiality is an unfair preference for one person or group over another, which causes one to favor one party more than the other. Bias, favoritism. Now, the key line in this definition reveals that partiality is an unfair preference. Here lies the problem. Vis-a-vis, unfair preferences are based upon inequity. And where there is inequity, there can be no honesty. Facts. This begs the question, how would one turn their hand to work inequity after they have unlocked the power of honesty? The answer is sure, and it is also founded in the definition of partiality. Vis-a-vis, partiality is equated to bias and favoritism, i.e., a predilection towards someone based upon past experiences. Here lies the inflection and the problem. And it is such an immense problem that I will offer it as an inflection point and a warning, for it is one of the more popular pathways into the dying nation of Israel. Your past experiences will mislead you into endorsing the spirit of dishonesty in order to protect individuals and relationships that are contrary to the will of Elohim. My dear friends, hear me carefully as I say, I am not speaking this matter in theory. Quite the contrary, I am speaking it from experience. And if you happen To get this far in your quest, you will also speak this matter from experience. Here is why. There are intervals in this quest where Yahuwah will separate you from those who don't possess your spiritual values, to wit, those who are not walking in obedient faith to the Father's will. Now, as you have likely gathered, one of those intervals is the fear of Elohim. Along these lines, the fear of Elohim is designed to separate those who worship Elohim from those who are engaging in blasphemy. As it pertains to blasphemy, you will find in this nation a treacherous herd of dogs, goats, and pigs who work very hard to cover their sins and the sins of others because they have been infected with partiality. We know this because they are not trying to cover everyone's sins. Quite the contrary, they will only work to cover sin if they perceive there is some carnal benefit involved. Now, although they can't see it, these spiritual miscreants are engaging in bribery. Not only this, but by attempting to cover the sins of others, these miscreants are sharing in their sins. And as I have said before and often, they will also share in their judgment. My dear friends, this is why I spent ample time in the prior series warning you about the immense dangers of dishonesty. And if you didn't see it then, you should see it now. For dishonesty and partiality are two of the deadliest poisons when taken together. This is clear to see, for when taken together, dishonesty and partiality will corrupt your soul with defilement and carnality. We know this because bribery is based upon carnal value, and carnal value can only be assessed by a carnal mind and a heart that has been defiled. Double facts. Ergo, take my advice and assess every relationship you are in and ensure your assessment is based on spiritual value. And trust me, there is no spiritual value in a relationship that is fraught with bribery. For where there is bribery, there can be no honesty. And where there is no honesty, there can be no value. How partiality defeats righteousness. Now, that was a summary of how partiality defeats the work of honesty. We should now turn our attention to analyzing how partiality defeats the work of righteousness, which on all counts is an even greater feat. Let's get started. First and foremost, you should consider how partiality does not attack righteousness the same way it attacks honesty. This speaks to the strategy and intelligence of lawlessness and why the enemy will fight you even if you are superior. It is because anyone can pull off the upset if they have a good strategy and they are fighting a fallible opponent. And all men are, to some degree, fallible. Along these lines, the strategy, partiality, adopted for his war with honesty was designed to capitalize on man's fallibility with subtlety. For his partner, i.e., dishonesty, is very treacherous and subtle. Consider this. Partiality and dishonesty will deceive you into focusing on the carnal value of a relationship, as opposed to the spiritual value and the correlating spiritual harm. To wit, partiality uses an honest yet incomplete assessment to cause you to make a dishonest conclusion. And the primary reason Why you didn't catch it is because the deception was subtle and you were complacent, which caused you to lack focus, which blinded you to the deception. Now, that's the story on dishonesty and how partiality empowers this degree of lawlessness to subvert the power of honesty. And although this strategy is extremely effective, partiality takes a different approach with righteousness. If you recall, righteousness is a very powerful degree of holiness. Ergo, partiality will not defeat him with subtlety and passive deception. Quite the contrary. Oh, quite the contrary. My dear friends, hear me carefully as I say partiality uses the same playbook as unrighteousness, and yet he will succeed where unrighteousness has failed. Here is why. Partiality provides you with a detached reason to follow a path of unrighteousness. Now, here lies the deception vis-a-vis by embezzling in detached reasoning. You are deceiving yourself into believing that the wrong you are doing is not wrong under the following premise, which I ask you to consider carefully. Per the theory of detached reasoning, one can be attached to a criminal and at the same time, they are detached from his or her crimes. Ergo, those who transact unrighteousness via partiality will associate themselves with the sinner and assume they are immune to their sins. Here lies the deception. And we have touched on this in prior podcasts. Vis-a-vis, you cannot associate with persistent transgressors and obtain spiritual immunity from the judgment of their persistent transgressions. Why? It's because you are engaging in partiality. For where there is no partiality, there can be no association. Now, I'm not going to relitigate this matter, for anyone who is being led by the Ruach of Elohim can clearly see this matter by now. And if you can't see it, trust me, you are farther away from the kingdom of heaven than you realize. Now, for those of you who can see, you must be wary of this situation. To wit, when you show partiality and associate with transgressors, a terrible thing happens. Consider this, my friends, and be advised. When you show partiality to transgressors, you are defending their transgressions. And by defending their transgressions, you are indicting the Most High Elohim and condemning his righteousness. Trust me, this is not something you want to do. For as partiality is the primary driver of prejudice, it carries the same judgment as blasphemy. To wit, it won't be forgiven. Listen to me. Anyone who indicts the Most High Elohim will not be forgiven. Selah. My dear friends, hear me carefully as I say, the word of truth is very clear on this matter. Vis-a-vis, you cannot stand for righteousness and then fail to call out the unrighteousness in your midst. That's not standing. That is sitting. And if you're the coward or the fool who wants to sit while the spirit of unrighteousness is destroying our nation, let me tell you something. When you cover and or share in the sins of others because you are partial to your family and your friends, a spiritual chain is wrapped around your foot, which signifies that you are bound to the judgment of their transgressions, and their end will be your end. Here lies the inflection, the danger, and the problem. To wit, those who share and the sins of others know what they are doing. Trust me, they know they are following a path of unrighteousness because the Ruach has revealed it to them. And thus, they will only have two choices. A, they can repent and sever the bond with these transgressors, or B, they can give their consent to partiality and be guilty of sin by association. Now, as you would expect, many in this nation have followed the second path, and in doing so, they erase the great work of virtue, obedience, and faith, and they never obtain the victory over their sinful nature. Alas, this is the certain fate of those who blaspheme Elohim by showing partiality to men and women who do not fear him. And if you would receive it, they will reap a greater judgment here and now and forever. And yet, after all this, the hand of Elohim is not finished. The hand of Elohim is still stretched out. Now, here is the final word. You defeated blasphemy, irreverence, and immorality. And now you must deal with partiality. Brothers and sisters, hear me carefully as I say, we have spent the past 12 months analyzing some of the deadliest spiritual viruses and diseases known to man. Notwithstanding, we are just now at the very end addressing the deadliest one of them all. Enter partiality. Now, if you have been with us since the beginning of this exposition of lawlessness, then you should be able to see how partiality can only exist if you have not eliminated doubt, disobedience, contempt, and prejudice and their secondary degrees. Therefore, if you have been faithful to the word we have delivered, then your battles with partiality should be straightforward, and you will obtain the victory. And yet, should that be the case, I advise you to always be on your guard. And remember, the enemy won't stop fighting you because you are superior. And oftentimes, your most difficult battles are with an opponent who is clearly inferior. Heretofore, I recommend, even though you know partiality is coming for you and he is a most formidable foe, focus on you and your path to victory and cast your lot to ever grow. Now, here is today's assignment. Meditate on the word you have heard today. And as always, ask the Father to reveal the truth to you. For the children of Elohim live by conviction. And if he has not convicted you, or if you had not heard him concerning these matters, you should pray until you do. Today, I want you to meditate on the word I have shared. We covered a lot of material, and so that is the only assignment for today. Consider these matters, my friends, and be watchful as you pray. Now, here is what's next. We completed today's podcast, End Times 491, Reigning Over Prejudice, Part 1. And the next podcast is entitled End Times 492, Reigning Over Prejudice, Part 2. I will post this podcast on Friday, June 20th, 2025. Until then, my friends, continue to be led by the Spirit of Elohim. Continue to watch, continue to pray, continue in fasting, and most of all, continue to be focused, for the end is coming. The end